Hi everyone, thank you for clicking on this webinar. So throughout this training assessment qualification, there are going to be 8 different webinars dedicated to content within your training assessment qualification. So as you can see, this is going to be the first webinar in a series of 8 webinars. So the structure of the webinars flows through how your course is structured. So today we're going to be talking about the TAE DES 401 and the TAE DES 402 webinar, the units. So there's actually going to be 2 different videos dedicated to these units, but today we're going to be talking about what it's called competency standards as well as training.gov.au essentials. So a lot of this webinar is going to set a lot of foundations for the rest of your course, namely what competency standards are, what a competency-based assessment system is, as well as what the vet sector is on a whole. We're also going to do a little bit of a tutorial as to how to use the training.gov.au website, how to navigate it. It is a website that you will be using quite frequently throughout this course. So let's get through it. Okay, so today's learning objectives in this webinar are, as you can see on the screen right there. So firstly, at the end of this webinar, you should be able to recognize the hierarchy of nationally recognized training components. You should be able to navigate the training.gov.au website effectively. You should be able to understand the rationale of competency standards. You should be able to identify where competency standards can be located. We'll also talk about the importance of industry benchmarks, and we'll also have a look at what's called packaging rules, which concerns some of the qualifications or all qualifications within the vocational sector. Okay, so when it comes to vocational education training, so VET, within this industry there is what's called a hierarchy of nationally recognized training. Now, as you can see on the screen, there's a few sectors there. Beginning at the top, we have our industry reference committees. We also have our service skills organizations. We have training packages, qualifications, units of competency, and competency standards. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each one of these and how they relate to other components within the hierarchy. So at the top, we have what's called the industry reference committee. Okay, so an industry reference committee, it's an industry-specific independent organization. So a group of experts within a particular industry, for example, hospitality, they come together and they identify what's going on in the workplaces, so that way they can gather intelligence of workplace performance. They gather this intelligence because the performance within the workplace is how nationally recognized training is developed. When industry reference committees look at the performance, they're also talking about national standards with regards to competencies. So the industry reference committee, they're basically the knowledge base for particular industries who help decide what the nationally recognized benchmarks are for particular units and competency standards within that industry. So for example, the business industry, their relevant industry reference committee is what's called the Business Services Sector Advisory Committee. So again, these are independent organizations. They do not, they're not a part of governments at all. They are independent. And the main reason why they're independent is just so that the competency standards aren't exactly biased to what the governments want or need. It's basically a reflection of what is actually really going on in the workplace. Okay, so there's industry reference committees, but there's also what's called service skills organizations. So again, these are independent organizations and they define and maintain high industry standards. Now they're different to industry reference committees because the skills services organizations, they're the ones who actually create and write what the national standards are. So the service skills organizations gathers the information and intelligence from the industry reference committees. They pass it on to the service skills organizations, and it's up to the service skills organizations to decide and determine what units of competency there are, what criteria needs to be met for all of these competency standards. So as you can see on the screen, the business industry's relevant service skills organization is PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, some of you might be familiar with PricewaterhouseCoopers. They are a fairly large organization, a worldwide organization. They somehow landed the gig of being the service skills organization, and one is for the business industry. So these SSOs, they're fairly new in terms of training. So we're talking within the last 3 to 4 years they've come into the vocational training space. So there's still a lot of new content there. They do differ to what we had before, where we had, for example, the Innovation Business Skills Australia. They were the ones who it was industry. They acted as an industry reference committee and a service skills organisation. But what's happened now is they've divided the two, mostly so there can be more accurate representation and more professional approach to defining nationally recognised training. Okay, yep, so the industry reference committees, they get in discussions with the service skills organisations. What do they actually create? What they create is called the training package. So the training package also focuses on what's called the Australian Qualifications Framework. You may have heard of this. The AQF is basically a rating for different qualifications within Australia. So for example, if you're completing a Certificate 1 course, that's known as an Australian Qualification Framework Level 1. A diploma's Level 5, and it also includes tertiary education, which we don't need to focus on here. So for example, a bachelor's degree is AQF Level 7, right up until a master's and doctorate, which is Level 9 and 10. Okay, and the AQF, it basically sets a standard for the level of skills and knowledge required at a particular AQF level. So you can expect there to be more skills and knowledge required if someone's completing a Certificate 4 in business compared to a Certificate 3 or Certificate 2. Even though it's all in business, they're packaged at different AQF levels. So the training package has lots of different qualifications, similar qualifications which can be packaged at different levels. And they call this a training package because that's what it is. It's literally a package which is used to identify training. So when we're talking a package, we're talking heaps and heaps of different nationally endorsed standards. So they've picked out, okay, here's all the criteria on how to organize business travel. Here's all the criteria on how to manage finances, etc., etc. So they've got all these units just floating around because, as determined by the IRCs, that's what is actually going on in the workplace. They're the standards for what actually occurs. So units of competency, they would only exist if it was relevant to a workplace. Okay, and that final point there, it focuses on workplace industry requirements. They're not just going to make units of competency and other packagings just for the sake of it, just for fun. It's reflective of the current day-to-day needs, and training packages can be updated on a very regular basis. So the BSB Business Services Training Package was developed by PwC, which is PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now the Business Service Training Package contains hundreds and hundreds of units of competencies and probably even 100 or so different qualifications, right through business, human resources, work health safety, you name it. Okay, so now that a training package has been developed and there's all these competencies, these nationally recognized competencies just floating around, well, what do we do with these units of competencies? Well, what we do is we package them together to create a qualification. So a qualification is a collection of units of competency intended to demonstrate workplace outcomes. For example, the course you're completing right now, The TAE 40116, Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, is a qualification. The qualification is a collection of 10 different units of competency. Now, these units aren't unique to the training assessment qualification. Some units can be plucked and imported to other qualifications, but it's the packaging of the units together that makes the qualification. Every qualification has what's also called packaging rules. So in order to complete a qualification, you need to ensure you meet certain packaging rules. So what units you complete. So we'll talk a bit more about packaging rules a bit later, just as long as you know that packaging rules explain how many units need to be completed within a qualification and what types of units need to be completed. Going back to our business example, you can see on the screen that the BSB 42015 Certificate 4 in Leadership and Management is a qualification within the BSB training package. So on the previous slide, we had our training package. What's happened is the package has grouped all these different units together to make this qualification. Alright, so you probably heard this a few times already, but we're talking a lot about units of competency. Now, a unit of competency, it defines multiple competency standards which are expected to be met in the workplace. Okay, an example of what you're completing right now, the training assessment qualification. Your first assessment contains 2 different units of competencies. Within each of these units of competencies, there's what's called competency standards. The competency standards are very explicit criteria for what an individual needs to meet in order to demonstrate evidence of meeting that unit of competency. So using the example on the screen, the BSB MGT 402 Implement Operational Plan, that's a unit of competency within the Cert 4 in Leadership and Management. The Implement Operational Plan unit of competency contains about 15 to 20 different elements and performance criteria. It also contains a range of required skills and knowledge. All those things together make up the unit of competency. This will make a lot more sense a bit later on once we actually start going through a review of what how to use train.gov.au. So if you're a little bit lost, that's okay. We'll approach it very soon. Okay, so there's all these units of competency. We're talking about competency standards now. So a competency standard is the basic level of effective performance to meet industry requirements and is defined as a learning outcome. So just remember that in vocational training, that this is a competency-based system. If you can provide evidence of meeting all of the competency standards within a unit of competency, then you should be awarded competency in that unit. Yeah, try to see how many times I said the word competency just then. You're going to hear that word a lot, and it's kind of lost all meaning to me, but just roll with it. You're going to hear competency this, competency that. So, an example on the screen there is Performance Criteria 1.3. Identify and use key performance indicators, or KPIs, to monitor operational performance is a competency standard within the BSB MGT 402 Implement Operational Plan. Now, that's one particular criteria in amongst 15 or so different criteria on how to implement operational plan. So what's happened here is the training package developers they've determined that for someone to be able to implement operational plan, that one of the things in order to be able to implement an operational plan is having the skills and knowledge on how to identify and use key performance indicators to monitor operational performance. Okay. Alright, so on the screen here is a list of different types of competency standards you might encounter within a unit. So in a lot of the newer released units, you'll see things such as elements, performance criteria, performance evidence, knowledge evidence, foundation skills, and assessment conditions. Now, The elements performance criteria, they kind of intertwine with the performance evidence and knowledge evidence. The criteria in the performance evidence is literally what the person needs to do. Knowledge evidence is theoretical. We also have what's called our foundation skills. So when we're talking about foundation skills, they're the basic core skills that a student needs to demonstrate in relation to the unit itself. So what reading skills does the student need to demonstrate? What writing skills? What numeracy, if it's relevant? There's also the assessment conditions. So every unit will have particular conditions under which the unit would need to be assessed. So for example, some units might say that the assessments must be conducted in a particular workplace, or must be conducted by someone who has had 2 or 3 years experience. The assessments might need, the students completing the assessments might need access to organizational procedures or certain equipment, etc. Now, a lot of the older units of competency, they'll have elements of performance criteria, but they'll also, instead of performance and knowledge evidence, they'll have what's called the required skills and the required knowledge. And they'll also have what's called the critical aspects for assessment. So if you ever come across an older unit of competency, so we're talking about probably anything released before 2015, you'll probably see required skills, required knowledge, and the critical aspects for assessment. Okay, so just to show you a little bit more about what we're talking about when it comes to training components, competency standards units, anything to do with competencies in the vet sector, it's probably a lot easier to show it as opposed to discuss it with pictures. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the training.gov.au website. This is the website which will contain all of the information you need to know about training and assessment components. So you can't see in the top left-hand corner of the screen, but I've just typed in training.gov.au. This is the web page that comes up. Now, for the majority of your course, you'll be required to use the National Register of Vet. So if you come to the website, you want to click on the right-hand one which says continue to train.gov.au. Okay, so this is what train.gov.au looks like. This is what it's looked like for a very, very long time. You'll see these red dots. A colleague of mine said that this kind of looks like a bit of an alligator. So there's like the tail there, the little body, and then the mouth kind of pointing down. Anyway, this is the website where you can search anything to do with training and assessment. If you're looking at information provided by a training organization, you can look it up. Now, just to get you started, once we're on this home page, we can see on the right hand side there's a thing called a quick search. You can search for nationally recognized training, which is what we're going to be doing for the majority of the course. If you're doing other sorts of, I guess, if you're working within a training organization and you need to refer to other providers, or even if you're just looking for a course to complete yourself, you can actually look for a specific training organization by typing in its number, or you can type in a keyword if you're not exactly sure what their RTO number is. But just for what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at nationally recognized training components. So probably the easiest thing to do is, if you're looking for a nationally training component, is just to type in a keyword. So in here I'm going to type in management and see what happens. Click search. Okay, wow, so there's a lot of different results here. So what's happened is it's basically looked for the search term. It's come up with almost 4,000 results for different training packages, different qualifications, and units of competency. So where should we begin? Why don't we have a look at a unit of competency? Okay, so as you can see, I've clicked on this. There's all these different units of competency. Administer a fatigue risk management system, administer court fines and debt management. That's a lot of things to choose from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably narrow my search just a bit. So I'm going to go back to the home page, and I'm going to look up the unit of competency that we were talking about before, which is the implement operational plan. So I'm going to type in operational plan, see what happens. Okay, so there's still quite a few units of competency, 19 results. As you can see on the right hand side, there's all these ones, a lot of units saying if they're deleted or current or superseded. Whenever we're completing anything within this qualification, please always choose anything that is current. If it's deleted, it's old. If it's superseded, it's old. You want a big, well, it's not big, you want a green current for the words. So as you can see here, this is the unit of competency we were talking about before. Okay. And the beauty of this search function is if you actually know the unit title, you can actually type that into the search function. So if I go back home and I go full nerd and basically know which unit code it is. I mean, like, I didn't know, I just saw it then. But anyway, type in BSB MGT 402, hit enter. All right, that's a bit better. As I said before, always want to choose the more current version of the unit of competency. So we're going to click on this one. All right, so here's the unit of competency details for this unit we were talking about before. Again, you want to make sure the usage recommendation there says current. Don't look at the release for currency. You want to look at the usage recommendation. If that says deleted or superseded, please don't use it. We want to make sure that that says current. So I'm just going to say it again. Not there. You want it there. Current. All right. Just to show you what it looks like, if we click on the previous version of this unit of competency, so at the end it's got a little A at the end, and click on that. See how it says usage recommendation superseded, but up here it still says current for the release. That's really misleading. You just want to look for the usage recommendation, and say you typed in unit of competency and it was superseded, and you go, oh, okay, well, what's happened to this unit of competency? Just have a look down here. Mapping is superseded by an equivalent to BSB MGT 402. Okay, so I'm going to click on that, and we're back here. So current there. Alright, so when we're looking at this unit of competency, we can find all sorts of details, but most importantly is what's called the competency standards. Sorry, pardon me. In these competency standards, it tells us what needs to be demonstrated as evidence in order for someone to achieve a competent result for this particular unit of competency. So let's just scroll down a little bit. Don't really care too much for that, or that, or that, or that, just yet anyway. We're going to go down to the unit of competency. So now this tells us a lot of information about this unit of competency. We have here an application, which is just a brief overview as to what is what this unit is basically about. So it's talking about planning by and monitoring and adjusting operational performance, planning, acquiring resources, and providing reports on performance as required. So we're going to see a lot of criteria within this unit which covers those few aspects, and we can do so by looking at, or we can start by looking at the elements and performance criteria. Okay, so what we're seeing here, on the left hand side we have what's called the elements, and on the right hand side we have the performance criteria. Now, the purpose of the elements is just to group some of the performance criteria together. So my suggestion here would be focus on the performance criteria column, because this is where some of these specific competency standards lie. I mean, you can look at the elements just for a general overview. So, okay, they need to be able to implement operational plan, but what's involved with that? Okay, well, part of the implementing operational plan is being able to identify and use KPIs to monitor operational performance. That's just, as you can see, one of the few competency standards within this element. So another competency standard, manage contingencies by adjusting the implementation of the operational plan in consultation with others, providing assistance in developing the presentation of proposals for resource requirements in line with operational planning processes. What I'm trying to get at here is it's not just as easy as asking someone, how do you implement an operational plan? Okay. And even down here, the element is literally implement operational plan. But what's involved with implementing an operational plan? Well, according to this unit of competency, which was designed and developed by the industry reference committees and the service skills organizations, this is what they've come up with. For someone to be able to implement operational plan at this AQF level, that's the criteria they need to do. Now, not only do they need to implement operational plan, they also need to implement resource acquisition and monitor operational performance. So, still relevant to the unit, someone would need to demonstrate evidence of all of these performance criteria. So, was there 5, 7? There's about 13 performance criteria in total. Okay. So, scrolling down a little bit more, and we have the foundation skills. Now, we quickly went over what the foundation skills were. As you can see on the left-hand side are all the foundation skills. So we got learning, reading, writing, oral communication, and numeracy. These 5 skills cover the language literacy and numeracy requirements, which will go into a lot more detail when it comes to the third webinar, which looks at that unit in particular. All you need to take from here is if someone was to be completing this unit of competency, for them to show evidence of their, say, oral communication skills. In order to do that, they need to participate in a variety of spoken exchanges with a range of audiences, varying structure and language to suit the audience. So, if you're implementing an operational plan, it's not all just sitting at a computer typing up an operational plan. The training package developers need individuals to show the oral communication skills of partaking in spoken exchanges with many different individuals. Okay, and same with numeracy. Now, you might not think that there's really much numeracy towards this unit, but according to the package developers, there is. You need to make sure that you're using appropriate and familiar mathematical techniques to organize timely supply of adequate resources for the operational plan, and to use budgetary information to monitor performance. So using a budget, I guess that focuses on numeracy, so that kind of makes sense. That's just really demonstrating that, hey, numeracy is a core component of this unit, so that's what the individual needs to show, numeracy-wise. So my advice to you is, if you're looking at the descriptions for the foundation skills, is I would also consider them to be competency standards, because someone completing this unit would need to be able to demonstrate evidence of all of these dot points. All of them. And they may or may not be integrated with the criteria above in the performance, the elements of performance criteria. So it's probably, just to be safe, just assume that they are just unique competency standards. So as we scroll down, unit mapping information, the links, don't really find much of that useful. Modification history, yeah, it can be useful, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to talk about these. Alright. So, even though we have the elements of performance criteria, we also need to ensure that students are meeting these assessment requirements. So, in these requirements, there's different performance evidence. So, someone completing this unit would need to demonstrate evidence of the ability to. They would also need to demonstrate knowledge of being able to describe this, describe that, and explain that. So it's not all just doing, it's not all just having the theoretical knowledge. They need to be able to practice what they preach and demonstrate exactly their skills and knowledge based on the unit of competency requirements. Okay, so just having a look at an example here. So for someone to be able to evidence of the ability to vary the operational plan and gain approval to deal with contingencies, that's something that needs to be enacted. So whoever's completing this unit would need to be able to gain approval to deal with contingencies in an operational plan. They would also need to be able to either verbally or by writing describe performance monitoring systems and processes, as well as the other few knowledge evidence requirements. So these are all competency standards. A student needs to be able to demonstrate evidence of all these in order to complete the unit itself. And lastly, we're talking about the assessment conditions. So these are the conditions under which an assessment for this unit of competency has to take place. So it's saying here, assessments must be conducted in a safe environment, although it seems fairly evident, but I guess they're just making sure that everyone knows it has to be a safe environment, where evidence gathered demonstrates consistent performance of typical activities experienced in the management and leadership field of work and includes access to organizational operational plans, policies, and procedures. So if someone was completing this unit of competency, the assessor must ensure that the student completing it has access to organizational operational plans, policies, and procedures. They also need access to budget requirements, physical and human resource procurement documentation, employee induction, and performance monitoring procedures. They need access to those documents and materials because that'll help them demonstrate evidence of the criteria, and it's mostly to replicate what really happens in a workplace. Alright, so now that we've spoken a little bit about training.gov.au, let's just go back into the webinar content. So we've spoken a lot about competency standards, which were the elements, performance criteria. You saw the foundation skills, as well as the required knowledge, the performance evidence, the knowledge evidence, and the assessment conditions. Now, let's talk about why are these competency standards important. So competency standards are developed to meet industry requirements. So the industry reference committees and SSOs, they determine what's happening in industry and what benchmarks need to be met in industry to ensure a nationally consistent standard. So all those criteria that we saw for that BSB MGT 402 unit of competency, they all need to be met in order to achieve competence in a unit of competency. So every single criteria needs to be met in order to implement an operational plan. Industry determined that here's all the things involved with implementing an operational plan, so you have to demonstrate them through your knowledge, your skills, whatever, but you have to be able to demonstrate everything to achieve a unit of competency. A unit of competency can be put on a statement of attainment for national and formal recognition. So this is where we really reiterate that the vocational education and training sector is a criterion-based system. So what this means is you must meet all the criteria to pass. So that's by demonstrating 100% for every competency standard. And being in a criterion-based system, it's in comparison with what's called a norm-based system, whereby you are ranked against your peers, which is a system used commonly in grades 11 and 12 in university. So you're getting a ranking out of 100, you might get an A grade or a B grade. You might only need to get 50% in order to pass. Whereas in the vet sector, because it's criterion based, that means all the criteria needs to be ticked off. It doesn't actually matter if you've been able to demonstrate evidence of 99% of the entire unit. Well, in the eyes of the vet sector, that's not good enough. You need to be able to tick off every single competency standard. Okay. When it comes to vet as well, it doesn't actually take into account how others perform. As long as you can meet them, then that's all that matters. So the second point on screen there is high quality work is important. However, meeting every competency standard is essential. So you can have the best work in a particular thing, particular field, but as long as you can meet every single different criteria, you should be fine. So there's a unit out there on, say you had to make a ham sandwich. You can make the best ham sandwich out there. You could have the best breads, the best ham. It tastes awesome, but you would still get marked off for someone who simply put a piece of ham in between two slices of bread. You made a ham sandwich, you get the tick, done. It doesn't matter how good it is, as long as you can meet it, that's all that matters. So yeah, still have high quality work, but you need to meet all the criteria. That's the main point there. Okay, so we're going to go into a bit of a hypothetical example as to more or less a direct and indirect implication for what happens if someone doesn't meet all of the competency standards, but is deemed to have met them all. So for this particular hypothetical, pretend that you, the student watching this video, you've enrolled into the Handle Food Safely in a Retail Environment unit of competency. So if you were to look up that unit of competency on training.gov.au, you would see there'd be all these different elements, all these different performance criteria, as well as required skills and knowledge, which you need to meet in order to be able to handle food safely in a retail environment. So it's a fairly large umbrella. You're probably thinking, okay, well, what could be involved in there? Well, it's disposing of food that's no longer edible. It's using contamination control. There's a lot of ways you need to handle food safely in a retail environment. Yep, so after looking at the unit of competency on train.gov, here's a couple of examples of some performance criteria. So one of them is dispose of food promptly to avoid cross-contamination. Seems pretty important if you want to be handling food safely in a retail environment. And also following hand washing procedures to minimize risk of contamination. So you don't just run your hands under some water, you have to follow a particular hand washing procedure. Again, it's all so that you can handle food safely in a retail environment. Alright, so you're making your way through the course. You've been trained in pretty much everything there is to know about handling food safely in a retail environment. Yeah, so you've done training, more training, and even more training, and now it comes time for your assessment. So you feel that you're equipped with all the knowledge and skills in order to perform the assessment. So one of your assessors comes on board and starts assessing you. Alright, so during the assessment, so we'll call this, say, a written assessment, which is basically just a written exam. You've given all these questions and you're answering them, and there's a question in there which talks about reporting any health issues or illnesses to appropriate personnel. For whatever reason, the answer you gave was completely off the mark, but again, then for whatever reason, your assessor, looking at your response, kind of, twitches his eye a little bit and thinks, well, you were able to answer everything correctly for all the other questions. I was able to observe you handling food safely. So, look, I'm just going to give you this one. You haven't got it right, but hey, you know what? You've been able to meet all the other criteria. If it seems fairly obvious what to do if you're sick, you tell someone you're sick, and it's obvious why, but for whatever reason, you as the student completing assessment was completely off the mark. So what I'm trying to get at is that you've been assessed as competent for this entire unit, but you weren't actually able to demonstrate how you would report any health issues or illnesses to appropriate personnel. Alright, so kind of what I was talking about before, your assessor incorrectly makes the assumption that you know you should report your health issues to appropriate personnel such as a manager. So the assessor made this assumption. The assessor should know better because in vet, we can't actually make assumptions about a learner's skills and knowledge. And a main reason why is for reasons like this, is it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how much you know about this and that, we need evidence. And we can't just make assumptions. If you were to get audited and they said, how did you know that this student knew how to report an illness? And if you just said, oh, well, they should know that, yeah, they're not going to like that response. So we also can't make assumptions as well because different individuals have different needs. Some people might not actually have interpreted the question correctly. Some people might not have English as their first language. Whatever reason, you can't make an assumption about a learner's skills and knowledge. So yeah, your assessor marks you off as competent for this unit after being assessed against everything else. So despite all the other things you demonstrated, you technically did not meet one of the competency standards and therefore not all of the requirements for a unit of competency. So how could this eventuate? You know, whilst it does seem fairly obvious to, report if you're sick, you haven't actually demonstrated any evidence of it. So for theoretical sake, well, yeah, just we're talking as if this is a hypothetical. Let's pretend that you, who completed that unit of competency, you actually don't know how to report illnesses, or maybe you didn't even know you had to in the first place. You were just expected to rock up to work and just work even though you were sick and ill. So, I mean, there's lots of ways that this could eventuate. You could get other people in the workplace sick. You could contaminate some of the food and get people, other people sick who are eating your food. That's really gross. So, there could be all sorts of additional health concerns, and there's obviously a lot that could go wrong. So, because an assessor didn't assess you as fully competent in a unit because you missed the bar on one competency standard, that's not good enough. For you being the future trainer and assessor, you need to know that there is no competency standard which is stronger than another. You need to know that this is a competency-based system. You cannot take shortcuts. You cannot make assumptions. You have to collect the evidence to demonstrate their skills and knowledge in one way or another. Okay, so that's pretty important. Just keep that in mind, because later on in your course, you'll be designing your own assessments, and then you'll be assessing students. So not only will you need to know that you're designing assessments to cover all the criteria, you'll also need to learn how to assess a student's work. Okay, and doing the assessment, that seems to be a large component of a training and assessor role. Obviously, it's trainer and assessor, so you assess. Okay, so this is probably a bit of an extreme example. However, it is really meant to highlight why it is important for a learner to meet every competency standard. Essentially, competency standards do not differ in importance. All competency standards are equally important, and no competency standard should be overlooked. In a more immediate context, as a trainer, I have a legal and ethical responsibility to ensure your workbooks and associated documents meet the competency standards. Legally, because you would be awarded competency in a unit, and when it's been awarded, it implies that you have met all of the standards. So if you were holding that use food safely unit of competency and you're showing it to everyone, that's basically you saying, hey, I know how to demonstrate evidence of all the criteria within this unit, but you didn't. So that's pretty bad to me. So yeah, there's some legal issues and there's some ethical issues as well, because stating that you have met all of the competency standards when you haven't can lead to similar cases to the hypothetical scenario we presented before. The competency standards are developed for a reason, to ensure that any two individuals who have successfully completed the same unit of competency have the minimum level of skills and knowledge to effectively perform them. This is one important component of owning a qualification, or particularly the TA 416 Certificate 4 and Training Assessment, and understanding the importance of competency standards is a must. Alright, so I think we've talked a lot about competency standards today. We'll go into the next part. This isn't as long as a part compared to competency standards. We're just going to go through what's called packaging rules. Alright, so competency standards relates to different units, whereas the packaging rules applies to qualifications. So just as a refresher, the training package developers creates all of these units of competencies in areas here and there, and a qualification is created by basically cherry picking all these different units of competencies and packaging them together. So what this means is that every single nationally recognized qualification will have packaging rules. As a trainer designing a learning program, it is up to you to decide which units to include in the qualifications you train, deliver, and assess in. The decision of which units of competency are chosen are identified in what's called a training assessment strategy, which is the basis of your projects. We will cover training assessment strategies in the next webinar, so feel free to go through that one if you want to learn more about training assessment strategies. Just moving back to the packaging rules, there's two different types of units within a qualification. There's core units and there's elective units. In a nutshell, core units must be completed to achieve the qualification, and electives are used to fill in the remainder of the qualification. So let's look at a practical example. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to show an example of the qualification that you're currently completing, which is the Cert 4 in Training and Assessment. So what I'm going to do is I'm on train.gov.au right now, and I'm going to look up the training qualification. So I know the code, you probably get very familiar with this code as well, is TAE 4016. Cool. So I've got here Certificate 4 in Training Assessment. This is the qualification you're all completing. So when you look up a qualification on train.gov.au, if you scroll a bit down, keep going, you'll notice that there's these things called the packaging rules. Alright, so in order to achieve a Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, you need to be able to complete 10 units of qualification, 10 units of competency. So where do those 10 units come from? Well, here it says that there's 9 core units plus 1 elective unit. So let's just focus on the core units for now. The beauty when it comes to packaging rules is if it's a core unit, it has to be completed. There's no two ways around it. So if you look at the core units, these are the units of competency which have to be completed in order to achieve the qualification. So now you can see some of these units look fairly familiar. These are the 2 units which we're discussing right now. You can see there's the LN unit as well as your delivery units and your assessment units. So every single person who holds the TA 4016 qualification will have these 9 core units under their belt. Alright, so they've got 9 core units, but they've also given us example of 1 elective unit. So if we're reading the packaging rules, it says here that there has to be 1 elective unit. The elective unit may be from the elective list below. So there's a list of elective units there. Okay, hence the list below. Or from any currently endorsed training package or accredited course at Certificate 4 or above. The elective unit chosen must be relevant to work outcome and meet local industry needs. Let's just focus on this one. So 1 elective unit. The elective unit may be from the elective list below. So to ensure that someone completes the full training assessment qualification, they've got these 9 units, and let's just pick one of the units from the list below. As you can see, there's about 15 different ones here. Maybe this one might look a bit familiar to everyone. This is the elective unit that we've selected to be in this qualification. So therefore, by having these 9 core units plus this elective unit, that equals a TA 4016 Certificate for and Training Assessment. Now, other training providers might offer different electives. All the core units are going to be the same, but you might find that they offer the TAE DEL 301 Provide Work Skill Instruction as an elective instead. That's fine because it still complies with the packaging rules. So whenever you're designing your own learning program, you need to ensure that your learning program complies with the packaging rules. Okay, so let's look at an example of another qualification. Okay, so here we're looking at the Certificate 4 in Leadership and Management. So let's scroll down and find the packaging rules. Still looking at the Certificate 4 in Leadership Management packaging rules. So as you can see here, we scroll down just a little bit further, actually, got here the packaging rules. So in this qualification, there needs to be 12 units in total. Alright, so 12 units, no more, no less. Where do these 12 units come from? 4 core units. Alright, that's easy to understand. Here's the 4 core units, 1, 2, 3, 4. So everyone who has completed this qualification should have these 4 core units under their belt because everyone has to complete the core units. There's no two ways around it. You can't hold a qualification unless these core units are done. So that's the first 4. What about the other 8? So there's 8 electives, of which 4 units must be selected from Group A. 4 units may be additional units selected from Group A or B. And if not listed below, 1 unit may be from any currently endorsed training package or accredited course at a Cert 4 level or above. So let's go into, we'll look at each of these little points in more detail, but let's just keep in mind there has to be 8 elective units. So 4 units must be selected from Group A. When you're ever interpreting packaging rules, always keep in mind the difference between must and may. So if something says must, there's no two ways around it. You have to comply with that. When it comes to the words may, it doesn't actually necessarily, it's not 100% necessary, but you can still see that 4 units still need to be selected afterwards. So let's just go through this one first. 4 units must be selected from Group A. So we scroll down a bit, we can see there's the core units, they have to be completed. Now we have a list of Group A elective units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 9 Group A electives here. As per the packaging rules, you have to select 4. It doesn't say which 4 you need to select, you just have to pick 4 of these units. So you might pick that one, the INN unit, the RSK unit, and maybe a WHS unit as your 4 Group A elective units. Or you can do the MGT unit, or develop work priorities, doesn't matter, as long as the units you select comply with that requirement. 4 units from Group A. Okay, so we've got our 4 core, we've then got 4 that have been from Group A. So we can give that one a tick. The next part, we still need 4 more electives. 4 units may be additional units selected from Group A or Group B. So we've looked at Group A, but now there's also a much bigger list of Group B. So now what it's saying is you can pick any 4 additional units from Group A and Group B. Okay, it's probably about 20 or so there. Obviously under the condition that you've already selected 4 from Group A to begin with, you can then pick another 4 from Group A or B or combination. So you could technically have 8 Group A electives. You could technically have 7 Group A electives and a Group B elective. As long as you're still meeting that requirement, that's fine. We've got here 4 units may be selected from Group A or B. So again, as long as the remaining units you select comply with that packaging rules, then you can't really run into too many problems. Now, there's an extra point here which talks about, we call this importing units. So this packaging rule requirement says that if not listed below, so if the unit is not listed, within these 20 or 30 different elective units, it says that one unit may be from any currently endorsed training package or accredited course at a certificate 4 level or above. So just recap, there's 12 units in total. We've got 4 core, we've got 4 from Group A, there's still 4 left over. So what this is saying is the 4 units can come from Group A and or Group B, and you can actually also import 1 unit from any currently endorsed training package or accredited course at a certificate 4 level or above. So that's the training package developer's way of saying, hey, we're not going to list all 400, 500 different units of competency, but you as the learning program designer, under your discretion, you can basically cherry pick 1 unit from any currently endorsed training package or accredited course at a Cert 4 level or above. So you might find one in the community health services package which relates to leadership and management, or you might look, there might be one in hospitality, or even in agriculture. As long as the unit is relevant to the work outcome as well, then yeah, you can import a unit of competency. You'll find that when it comes to packaging rules, more often than not, you'll see there's core units, there's probably going to be elective units, and the majority of qualifications offer something similar to this, where you can import a unit. So, but that only lets you import maybe 1 or 2 units. So whenever you're looking at packaging rules, definitely read the packaging rules well. If you're designing a course and the total number of units says 12, make sure you have 12 units, because any less, it's non-compliant. Any more, it's just over-assessing. So the next question is, what elective units should you be selecting? So, there's 9 different Group A electives. There's about 15 to 20 different Group B electives there. The packaging rules are letting me select 8 elective units, and 4 must be selected at Group A. How do I pick which units to offer in my learning program? I'm not going to offer all 9 because that's too many units, but if I'm organizing a leadership management qualification and I want everyone completing the qualification to have more of a focus on financial activity and developing work priorities, then I would be picking this unit and this unit, and I'd also like the students to be able to do risk, work, health and safety, so I'd also pick these 2 units as well. So one of the ways you select elective units can be based on your course requirements. A lot of the course requirements are based on your target learner group, which you would determine within your training assessment strategy. So that's one way in which can help determine which units of competency you select. Another way to determine which units to select is, what competencies do your trainers and assessors have? In the vet sector, trainers and assessors can only train and assess units of competency which they can demonstrate evidence and currency that they can train that unit. So, for example, if I was to be offering this qualification and I look at the Group A electives, I have to select 4, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I don't really know how to report on financial activity, so I might not include that. I can't demonstrate that me as a qualified trainer assessor has the skills and knowledge in order to train someone in this unit. That's not fair. So I'm not even going to look at that unit. But I've got a work health and safety background, so maybe I could train this unit and maybe even this unit. In a past life, I might have been a mentor in a workplace, kind of like a tutor, so maybe I might be able to demonstrate evidence in training assessing this unit. So when you're designing your learning program and selecting units of competency. One thing to consider is what competencies do the trainers and assessors have? Some other things to consider are are there any financial requirements? So are you going to be looking at units which require more of a financial burden than others? So would there be any additional costs if you had to select a unit which was based on mentoring in the workplace? Or would it be more cost efficient to offer something a bit more paper-based, like developing work priorities? So one thing to consider is also the financial requirements when you're selecting the units. Okay, so that's basically the end of this first training session. So I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you would like to continue the webinar sessions, there's more for the successive assessments. There's 8 in total, so go for your life watching some of these. Just to clarify as well, this session focuses mostly on your first assessment, which is more of an underpinning knowledge of how the vet sector works, as well as how to use train.gov.au, because you will need to be using this website quite a lot. Okay. So if you have any questions, you can call the office on 1300 737 006, or you can email your trainer, or you can email trainer@ilec.edu.au, and so that way you can have a chat with one of the trainers. So if there's anything in this session you want to talk about, or if there's anything in your assessments you want to talk about, give us a call, send us an email. We'll be more than happy to help and clarify things for you. So hopefully everyone who's watching this got a lot out of it. There's still more to come. So yeah, thanks for opening this and listening.